There's a part of you that runs on autopilot. It makes your choices, shapes your relationships, spends your time, and you never gave it permission. Until you meet it, you'll keep wondering why life keeps happening to you instead of through you. There's a quiet bureaucracy inside your chest that you never appointed. It runs on habit, on memory, on a deep economy of avoidance and reward. You think you're the CEO of your life? You are not, at least not for most of the day. The true executive is often an amalgam of small, older voices, the child who learned how to be loved, the teenager who learned how to survive, the adult who made the first pragmatic bargain and never renegotiated. These voices meet, bargain, and issue orders long before your thinking mind gets in the meeting. That's the governor, unseen, unconsented, and shockingly efficient. Why does it feel like you're not calling the shots? Because decisions are rarely born in the bright, deliberate moments you imagine. Most decisions arise in the quiet, micro moments. What you do first when you wake up, how you respond to a text, whether you say yes or no to an invitation, how you soothe yourself after a bad day. Each tiny gesture deposits a record. Over time, those records form policies. Those policies become your operating system. Before you know it, your life runs according to defaults you never consciously chose. The governor is not evil. It started as a caretaker. It learned strategies that work to keep you safe, to keep you loved, to reduce pain. It collected heuristics, and if they did X, give them Y. If you feel Z, withdraw, and then made them into rules. The problem is that what once protected you in a narrow context now governs you in all contexts. A pattern that saved you from one hurt becomes the script that sabotages every intimate moment. The small victories that preserved short-term survival calcify into lifelong subservience. We confuse fluency with agency. If you execute a behavior smoothly, your ego congratulates you. Oh, I handled that well. But fluency often means habituation. Habits feel like skill, but many are just trained reactions. The governor is an expert at making reaction feel competent. It keeps the heart rate stable and the social world manageable. It trades the expansive risk of becoming for the narrower, safer loop of predictability. Understanding the governor begins with noticing its metaphors. How does it speak to you? Often it uses soft rationales. Be reasonable, not now. Think first. That language is the cloak of the driver's seat. It will couch fear as prudence, avoidance as patience, numbness as wisdom. When you hear yourself rehearsing reasons that maintain the status quo, you are listening to the governor's arguments. The key is not to shame those voices, they did a job, but to recognize that their mandate has expired. Recognition is the first jurisdictional shift. Name the default. Track the moments your life feels reactive rather than authored. Ask who benefits from this pattern continuing. The governor will always answer, you do, because short-term survival feels comforting. The conscious self must ask, what about 10 years from now? And be willing to pay the small present cost for future sovereignty. There's good news. Governors can be rewritten. The brain is plastic. Authority can be renegotiated, but you will not do it by arguing more cleverly with your mind. The governor learns through evidence, not rhetoric. It records consequences. To change the executive, you must produce counter-evidence. Small acts that prove a different policy produces safety, connection, and growth. That's how you begin to reclaim the seat, not by insisting you're in charge, but by showing you can be. This quiet shift from passenger to steward is slow, but it's the most consequential work you will ever do. And the first step is simply noticing who has been signing your life's checks. You did not arrive neutral. Something like an operating system installed itself in you long before you could speak sentences about identity. That system was coded in the language of childhood, the tone of approval, the places of withdrawal, the gestures that comforted you and the ones that hurt. Childhood is not an anecdote. It's infrastructure. It builds protocols that later run in adult conditions they were never designed for. Those early protocols decide whom you trust, how you ask for help, and the scale of risk you'll accept. Think about the first home you learned to be in. The house of origin teaches you what safety looks like. If safety came when you performed, you learned to perform to be safe. If safety appeared only when you were quiet, you learned to shrink to survive. If you saw emotional outbursts end in withdrawal, you learned that expression costs connection. Those early cause and effect lessons wrote subroutines that now flash in the adult present. Panic at intimacy, quick apologizing, people-pleasing, reflexive anger, numbness under praise. The original conditions no longer apply, yet the code runs. This programming also included scripts about worth. If caregivers modeled scarcity, time, attention, affection, you internalized a scarcity ledger that now credits every decision. Don't ask becomes a lifelong budget strategy. If a caregiver rewarded achievement and minimized feeling, you trade emotional authenticity for achievement metrics. Those trade-offs seemed rational in childhood. They were survival economies, but they ossify into governance over your adult moral choices. Understanding the origin is not an excuse. It is clarity. You don't absolve yourself by tracing the cause, but you can stop being mystified by the effect. When you see the script, you can start writing patch notes. You can create corrective experiences. The child code remains part of you, but you are now a grown steward who can decide whether that code serves the adult you want to be. Corrective experience works because the brain learns through new contingencies. If, as an adult, you repeatedly show that speaking your need brings care rather than retreat, the old protocol loses its authority. If you practice boundary setting and find relationships, recalibrate instead of explode, you revise the ledger. These small, consistent experiments are how you overwrite childhood, governance with adult sovereignty. And there's a moral twist. The child who wrote those programs did their best. The early strategies likely saved you from more harm than loss. Gratitude for the protective child does not stop you from altering its rules. You can both honor the survival and reallocate the power. That is how integration happens. The child's voice remains valued, but no longer vetoes the adult's authority. So the work of reclaiming your life begins with archaeology, looking into the foundations, naming the protocols, and then designing better ones with compassion and persistence. Because you cannot govern today with yesterday's instructions, and you do not have to. You don't wake up one morning and discover you've become someone else. You arrive there the way a river makes a canyon, by repetition. The decisions you think are trivial are the architects of your destiny. What you choose when one's watching compounds into who you will be when everyone else is watching. This is both terrifying and liberating because it means the tiny, mundane choices matter more than the sporadic heroic ones. Autopilot is efficient. The brain conserves energy by delegating repeated tasks to the unconscious. That's why brushing your teeth doesn't require moral debate, but the delegation goes further. It insists on running emotionally charged habits without supervision. You develop a reflex to soothe with scrolling, to avoid with anger, to compensate with work. Those reflexes produce patterns: the romantic cycle of idealize, fear, withdraw, the career cycle of overwork then burnout, the parent cycle of replicating what was given to you. These are autopilot economies. The problem arises when autopilot's operating parameters are outdated. The pattern that once resolved immediate tension now produces the long-term outcomes you hate. The autopilot doesn't ask permission to continue. It assumes what worked in the past should remain your policy. That's why people complain about not knowing why they acted as they did. The why is the autopilot's ledger. To disrupt autopilot, you must insert friction. Friction is a deliberate pause, a minimal interruption between stimulus and response. Put your phone in another room before bed. Take 3 deep breaths before replying to an accusation. Walk for 5 minutes after you've made a poor choice before trying to fix it. Friction interrupts the loop and creates a window where choice can reassert itself. Repeated friction rewires pathways. The autopilot begins to trust a different route. Another powerful lever is attention architecture. Where you point attention, you strengthen habit. If your attention is habitually toward anxiety cues, the mind finds more reasons to be anxious. Redirect attention. Intentionally, craft a morning ritual that aligns your first 30 minutes with the person you want to be. That early orientation exerts a disproportionate influence on the day's operating system. Finally, document micro-choices and outcomes. Keep a simple log. What was the trigger? What did you do? What followed? Evidence destabilizes the illusion of inevitability. It exposes the autopilot's operating manual. Reading a ledger of repeated choices gives you leverage to design alternatives. Over time, those alternatives compound into a new default. Autopilot isn't destiny. It's habitual authority you can contest. The small, persistent interventions tilt the scales back to your conscious will. Change the tiny choices and your life rewrites itself. There is a broker in your psyche who wields influence precisely because you neglected them. The disowned self. This is not a moral condemnation. It's a structural fact. Parts of your interior, anger, grief, desire, pride, get labeled unacceptable, packed away and left unintegrated. Being unseen does not erase them. It converts them into covert operators. They broker outcomes through stealth, a jealousy that erodes trust, a silent contempt that cuts off warmth, a protected vulnerability that refuses repair. The broker knows your soft spots and trades them for compliance. The disowned self acts through metaphor and proxy. It engineers scenarios that force expression but in ways you don't intend. You pick fights to enact anger. You sabotage to avoid the risk of success. You become impossible to please so you don't have to be seen. Those behaviors look like pathology from the outside but are actually desperate arbitration from the inside. The disowned part demands integration by creating situations that demand it. If you still refuse, it escalates. Integration begins with curiosity, not punishment. Meet the broker with questions. What does this emotion want? What would happen if it were heard? What safety does it seek? Naming the need de-escalates dramatic expression and opens negotiation. For example, the anger that feels explosive may want boundaries, not violence. The shame that hides may want repair, not forgiveness. The broker is not trying to destroy you. It's trying to be influential because it's been excluded. Psychological techniques that work are less about denial and more about hospitality. Allow the feeling to speak in a controlled way. Write a letter as if from that part. Speak it into a recording. Let it have 5 uninterrupted minutes. Those small acts teach the broker it can be seen without the drama. Over time, the covert deals stop. The disowned parts become participants in governance rather than saboteurs, and you must expect some losses. When integration happens, some relationships and patterns that were built on the broker's trades will recalibrate or dissolve. That is a necessary pruning. The broker's currency was short-term relief. Integration builds long-term capacity. It costs socially but pays in coherence. Finally, remember, the broker holds gifts too. Energy, creativity, urgency. When welcomed, those formerly disruptive impulses become fuel for art, discipline, and moral courage. Integration doesn't neutralize them. It redirects them. Invite the broker in and the household will finally begin to function. You can't have a coup against the governor with rhetoric. You need tactical interventions. Begin with daily micro-jurisdictions. Pick 5 moments where you'll refuse the default, the first 10 minutes of your day, the breakfast choice, the response to a text, the way you end work, the 5 minutes before bed. Make them sacred. These micro-jurisdictions are evidence for your executive competence. The governor learns from proof. Second, build friction that favors the higher self. If the governor seeks distraction, increase the cost of distraction and decrease the cost of courage. Place the phone out of reach. Set a public accountability post. Link a small reward to the completion of a meaningful task. Use the environment to tilt choices. Third, design brief rituals of interruption. A 3-breath reset before answering an emotional email. A 10-second naming of the feeling before reacting. A walking threshold before making decisions. These rituals aren't magical. They create a space for the conscious brain to act. Fourth, create corrective relational practices. Tell one person you're trying something new and ask them to call you out when they see the old pattern. Social mirrors accelerate change more than solitary discipline. Choose witnesses who care more about your growth than your comfort. Fifth, log microproofs. Keep a simple tally. Today I delayed a reactive reply. Today I set a boundary. Today I practiced saying no. Over time, the ledger rewrites identity. The governor reinterprets evidence. Finally, accept repair rituals. You will slip. Have a non-shaming quick repair routine. Name it, apologize briefly if needed, and enact a corrective microact within 24 hours. Repair prevents shame from calcifying and keeps authority in your hands. These pragmatic moves shift patterning. Authority changes not by speeches but by consistent micro-policy. Start with one micro-jurisdiction and defend it like your life depends on it. Because it does. Reclaiming control is not a single revolution. It is a repeated fidelity. You will be tempted to laissez-faire when new stability arrives. The old governor presses for rest. That is why stewardship requires systems, weekly reviews, quarterly retreats, trusted witnesses, and the humility to do repair. Build a governance council. A few people who will hold your promises, help you interpret evidence, and insist you do what you said you would do. Cultivate rituals of renewal, periodic silence, seasonal retreats. The practice of naming consequences before decisions. Keep the ledger visible. Celebrate microproofs. Let gratitude for the protective parts be a daily practice. Tenderness for the child. Self softens the authoritarian. Defenses and keeps you from reactionary swings. Sovereignty also needs moral clarity. Decide what you will not trade for comfort. Integrity with loved ones. The habit of learning. The willingness to be seen. When your values are explicit, you make different small choices. Values turn friction into currency. They explain why you pay small costs now for large gains later. And remember, repair as a political ethic. Mistakes will happen. Have a swift, accountable, non-shaming method for repair. This institutionalizes responsibility and keeps old governors from weaponizing shame. Finally, hold humility as your posture. The future you author is not a monument to self-mastery, but a practice in service. When authority is used for domination, it becomes tyranny. Keep listening. Keep integrating. Keep renegotiating with the parts that once governed you. Sovereignty is a stewardship of inner multiplicity. The work is long, but the prize is simple. To be the one who writes your life rather than the one written by it. And once you decide to be the author, life stops happening to you and starts moving through you.